My name is Mark Schultz. I'm the Education Director. As Sheetal said, I'll be presenting today along with my colleagues Hannah Burke, Education Manager at the Pulitzer Center, and Fareed Mostofi, Senior Education Manager. I'm just going to go through a few things before we get started to give you a sense of what to expect and to make some acknowledgments. Today's agenda, we're going to start with a brief introduction and goals. Then we're going to go through the Pulitzer Center's mission and resources. And then we're going to dig into exploring the project, the 1619 project from the New York Times Magazine, including articles, visuals, audios, and videos. Then we're going to be analyzing methods for using the project to support different kinds of curricular resources, lesson plans, and student work. And then we'll wrap with a Q&A. So the goals for today will be to explore the Pulitzer Center mission and educational resources, to look at print, audio, and visual elements of the 1619 project in order to evaluate how content from the project can support work that you're doing in your communities, and to explore curricula and activities designed by Pulitzer Center staff and partner teachers to engage with the 1619 project, to analyze student work from those activities, and evaluate ways that the activities can be modified for your communities. I just want to acknowledge, before we really get started, that we are speaking to you in the midst of a global pandemic. School systems are massively disrupted for the foreseeable future, and you are all adapting. I want to say that we're very much with you. I myself am home right now. I have a 5-month-old in the other room whom you might be able to hear. She's really got some lungs on her. And I'm sure you are all dealing with similar kinds of circumstances. And I just want to say we will be sure to address ways to engage students remotely throughout today's presentation. And if you have questions about ways to do that or about anything else, you can use the chat box. And if the chat box gets overwhelmed, which it sounds like it might, you can also email my team at education@pulitzercenter.org. So please don't be shy. We want to hear from you. We want to connect with you. We want to be part of your community as well. So please do use the chat box if you can. Next, I'm going to turn it over to Fareed to get us all better acquainted. We want to know something about you, and we'd also like to tell you a few things about us. So Fareed, can you take it over from here?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark. So let's start by telling you a little bit about the Pulitzer Center. We are a nonprofit based in Washington, D.C., and you see our mission on the screen here, which is to raise awareness of underreported global issues through direct support for quality journalism across all media platforms and a unique program of education and public outreach. Our center is going on about 14 years now, and we were founded in response to data like this. So here's a 2016 Pew Research Center study looking at where Americans are getting their news on. And you see that the headline here that there's an increase in access online. There's a lot of positive things about more and more news moving online, which of course include how fast we're getting information. A lot of information is available for free. But one thing that we identified at the Pulitzer Center is that as there's increased information online, it can mean that there is less focus and funding for reporting on systemic issues, on what we call underreported or less represented issues. And so what we do is we actually provide grant funding to journalists to support the cost of reporting projects that are looking at issues that are something that require additional time, research, These are sometimes the kinds of stories that foreign correspondents used to cover before many of those positions were cut. And we want to make sure they're reaching diverse audiences. So we are working with journalists who are publishing in over 100 different news outlets on all kinds of different subjects. And what we also want to do is, because we know so much can happen and surprise us all, when these stories are published, rather than seeing them get swept up in different media cycles, we also have an outreach department to try and get those stories to as many communities as possible. These are some of the places that the stories have been published. You might see some outlets here that you check regularly. Often when I show this slide to students, I ask them to raise their hands if they see an outlet they don't normally look at, and just highlight here how all of us are looking at different information. That's why it's important to collaborate with many outlets to make sure that we're reaching as many people as possible and getting the word out about underreported stories. The ideas come from the journalists. They apply for grants for a project that has already been approved and commissioned by a news outlet that agrees to check their work and to support their reporting. So you can see here, since the ideas are theirs, we have reporting ranging from reporting on children and youth, climate change, migration, refugees, and more. Let's take a look at some of that reporting now.
We are simply putting forward the facts.
Often we see a lot of the more rural or maybe less visible communities being overlooked by the kind of coverage that's done with a quick turnaround.
Underreported stories, they're underreported for reasons. It usually has to do with our agenda setting.
It's driven by clicks and news cycles around things like disasters and elections. Of course, that doesn't tell the whole story about the world.
I think we're in trouble in our country. There's a lack of credibility for journalism among a lot of people that we have to rebuild, and I think we have to do it from the bottom up.
The grant from Pulitzer Center was indispensable for our work.
The Pulitzer Center offers funding and stability that means we can take more risks and try harder stories.
Our job was to go to Honduras and shed a light on the problems that are forcing people to flee.
We've been digging into what the on-the-ground impact of this growing opioid use has been in countries outside the U.S.
Modern slavery can take shape in various different forms.
It's where climate change, gold fever, and mercury poisoning meet.
What if I told you that the year 1619 is as important to the American story as the year 1776? We partnered with the Pulitzer Center on a curriculum. It's being taught in every state in America.
I've worked with students from 5th grade all the way through university level. It makes such a difference in how students are able to not only look at the news that's happening as something far away, but connect it to their own backyard.
Local journalism is really a bedrock for informed communities, making sure that our democracy works. And that's where we come in with bringing stories home.
As part of the Pulitzer Center's nationwide Connected Coastlines Reporting Initiative.
Tonight's report, produced in partnership with the Pulitzer Center.
This report is supported in partnership with the Pulitzer Center.
I want to thank the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting for giving me the support.
You may have noticed at the end there that it might be feeling like this video is asking for your support, and we are doing that here in just your attention. We are also a nonprofit, so we use that video to solicit support as well. But part of why I wanted to show that to you was to show you a glimpse at every piece of video that you saw there is coming from our journalists or from our outreach. You might have seen in the video that we have a strong focus on outreach, and my team works specifically in K-12 classrooms. So before we show you some of our resources, we're curious. How often do you use current news resources in your classes? Reply to the poll and tell us, do you use them every day, once per week, a few times per month, a few times per year, not often? And this is, can be when you were in the classroom physically, or for those of you working remotely, it could be now. And if you'd like to share some of the outlets you like to use in the chat box, I'm sure we can all benefit from that. All right, so we're going to take a look at the poll results here. Let's see. And I'm seeing that there's a real variety of responses in the room. So I'm glad that we have our chat box to share ideas, because definitely it sounds like We could be learning from each other about the experiences of being able to use the news every day, and many of us maybe not being able to use them very often. Part of why we have our K through 12 program is in response to the fact that we are seeing what we just saw in that poll. Students are seeing a different combination of news depending on where they go to school, what grade they're in, who their teacher is. And I wonder, and you can just reflect on this or reply in the chat box, outside of school, what are the majority of students looking at in the news? What are they drawn to? And what stories might interest them that they're not seeing? These questions guide our work and have led us to develop a digital program that we hope will combat what we also saw in this part of the 2016 Pew Research Center study, which shows that if you see on the left here, we have when young adults, and now this is 18 to 29, so maybe our students in the future, we're asked, do they follow the news most of the time? We see that group has the lowest responses to that question. We see less trust in the news among the 18 to 29-year-olds surveyed in 2016. We also see that when that younger group is looking online, or I'm sorry, looking at news, they're mostly looking online, websites, apps, social networking sites, where we all know they're seeing not only news, but of a lot of other information. Our mission then is to cultivate a more curious, informed, empathetic, and engaged public by connecting students and teachers directly with underreported global news stories and the journalists who cover them, hopefully to increase trust, to get questions answered, to also encourage critical thinking, and to support curricula. These are some of the different ways that we work on this mission in collaboration with teachers, schools, and school districts. All of the reporting that we support is available online at pulitzercenter.org for free to print, so that you don't need a subscription to any of the outlets we work with. We also write standards-aligned lesson plans and host student contests where students can actually complete a lesson plan and have their work shared through our website. We connect journalists directly to classrooms through virtual visits, and we also have curricula and do online workshops for students and teachers, and for some schools even we're able to do that in person. The specific resource we're going to look at today is a series of lesson plans that then led to workshops and also collaborations, all connected to the 1619 project. This is a screenshot of where we are starting to gather curricular materials. We're going to look at some of those later. But for now, another poll. We'd love to know how familiar you are with this project. So go ahead and respond here in the poll. How familiar are you with this project in the New York Times Magazine? Very familiar looks like you've read almost all of it, maybe you've used it in school. And not familiar, if you're just hearing about it, it might be helpful for us to know that. So go ahead and add in your poll responses here, and we'll take a look in 3, 2, 1, and let's see. It looks like, again, we've got a mix of responses. With the majority of us here learning about it for the first time, we hope we've developed a presentation that will meet all of your needs, and we'll definitely make sure we have time in the Q&A to answer any questions we didn't get to. Let's start with just introducing a little bit about the project. The 1619 project was published in the New York Times Magazine. Well, it started as a full magazine issue published in August, but there has been additional content published connected to the project since then that's not just in the magazine. We'll look at all of that content. We've supported reporting for several New York Times projects in the past. We did not support the reporting for this project, but after working with the New York Times for several years to collaborate on curriculum, we were approached by the Times to write lesson plans in connection to this project, and that's sort of how we became involved. For 1619, what we're going to do a little later is see what that outreach looks like, but let's start by just introducing you to the project. In the magazine, which was printed in August, what was included were 18 essays by leading journalists and historians. There were also 15, actually, it might actually be a little higher than that, poems and short stories that were inspired by key moments in U.S. history, and also 2 photo essays. All of that were in that magazine that you see here on the left. Also on the right, you see that the New York Times print newspaper published a broadsheet connected to the project. In there was a photo series that we'll look at in a moment and 2 essays. Since then, however, there's been a 5-episode podcast connected to the essays and a kids section. So there's a lot that can be used in classrooms, and we'll look at all of that now. To give you a brief introduction, we're going to hear from Nikole Hannah-Jones, sort of the architect of this project, a contributor to the New York Times Magazine, and also one of the writers of one of the key essays. Here we'll see her interviewed by PBS NewsHour about the project.
Today, the New York Times published the print edition of the 1619 Project. The name marks this month's 400th anniversary of the arrival of the first enslaved people brought from Africa to the then Virginia colony. The Times says the project aims to reframe the country's history, understanding 1619 as our true founding, and placing the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans at the very center of the story we tell ourselves about who we are. The project is led by New York Times Magazine reporter Nikole Hannah-Jones, who is the author of the opening essay. She joins me now. You have been working on this for a number of years, but you put this together very quickly. First of all, why? Why this topic? Why this issue?
Well, you don't have very many opportunities to ever celebrate the 400th anniversary of anything. And it seemed to me that this was a great opportunity to really, as you said in your opening, reframe the way that we have thought about an institution that has impacted almost everything in modern American society, but that we're taught very little about, that we're often taught is marginal to the American story. And we wanted to do something different. We wanted to use the platform of the Times to force us to confront the reality of what slavery has meant for our development as a nation.
And this isn't just about sort of the kind of textbook ideas of what happened to slaves. You've got essays in here about healthcare, about geography, about sugar, about music, all of these different ripple effects that happen throughout the economy and really life here. You say in a sentence, you said, we would not be the United States were it not for slavery. This is kind of one of the original fibers that made this country.
Absolutely. The conceit of the magazine is that one of the things we hear all the time is, well, that was in the past. Why do you have to keep talking about the past? Well, one, I think the past is clearly instructive for how we are right now. But also, the conceit of the magazine is that you can look at all of these modern phenomena that you think are unrelated to slavery at all, and we were going to show you how they are. And so we have a story in there about traffic patterns. We have a story about why we're the only Western industrial country without universal health care, about why Americans consume so much sugar, about capitalism, about democracy. We're really trying to change the way that Americans are thinking, that this was just a problem of the past that we've resolved, and show that it isn't. What many people don't know.
We're going to go ahead and pause there. I do see in the chat box here some questions about we're going to be able to have access to these videos. I believe the answer is yes, and we'll also check in on that at the Q&A. So we'll make sure you have all of that. What I want to start with is actually going into the content so you know what is available for your students. Everything you see here is also, you'll see later, available for free to download and to send to students. You can find that on the Pulitzer Center's website. So starting with the 15 essays that make up the project, each essay, as you see here, these are screenshots from the New York Times website. The introductory pages in the magazine look similar. There's an opening image and then also a title that introduces the main theme. These are 4 on the screen here. On the top left, you see the project is looking here at the lasting impact of slavery and the racist policies that followed on healthcare. At the top right here, you see Brian Stevenson is writing about the impact on the prison system. The bottom right here, how does traffic in Atlanta, how is that impacted by the lasting impact of slavery? And similarly on the left here, you've got Wesley Morris speaking about music. Additionally, the essays cover economics and also medical practices, science, politics, wealth disparities, sugar, migration within the U.S., even the discovery of pecans, more. Additionally, there's a lot of photography and visual content that can be useful in the classroom. At the center of the screen here, you see an image from a photo essay that is looking at Howard University Law School students who are interviewed about tracing their ancestry back to former slaves. And so the photo essay is accompanied by a short Q&A with those students, their families, And then throughout the essays, there are also a lot of primary source document resources. On the left, you see here a document from a former plantation owner. On the right, you see the cover of music that was included in the essay about music. So there's a lot that can be cut out, printed for students. I mentioned that there are creative works throughout the magazine. Those creative works are short stories and poems inspired by key moments in U.S. history. Let's take a look at one of those creative works now. On the screen here, you see a poem by Rita Dove. In a moment, we're going to hear the poem, and I ask you all to think, what moment in history is Rita Dove responding to? Feel free to share your answer in the chat box.
Youth Sunday. This morning's already good. Summer's cooling, Addie chattering like a magpie, but today we are leading the congregation. Ain't that a fine thing? All in white, like angels, they'll be sighing when we appear at the pulpit and proclaim, "Open your hymnals." Addie, what's the page number again? Never mind. It'll be posted, I think. I hope. Hold still, Carol, or else this sash will never sit right. There. Now you do mine. Almost 11. I'm ready. My, don't we look. What's the word the Reverend used in last Sunday's sermon? Oh, I got it. Ethereal.
I see in the chat box many of us have our understanding that this is in response to the September 15, 1963 bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church. So Rita's poem is actually one of two that respond to this moment. There are a total of, I looked it up, 17 creative works that you can use in your classroom, all accompanied by illustrations like the one you see on the screen. The print broadsheet that I mentioned includes two resources that could be really helpful in the classroom. At the top here, you see this is a visual essay that was put together by a curator from the Smithsonian Museum of African American History and Culture and a journalist from the New York Times, using objects from the museum's collection to examine underrepresented moments in U.S. history. Underneath, you see there's an essay from Nikita Stewart that challenges how slavery has been taught in schools. Both essays are sort of in response to that question about an exploration of how slavery is taught in schools. Four of the essays from the magazine are explored in detail through a 5-episode podcast. These don't include all the content from the essays, but offer really interesting glimpses. And the web pages are especially great to host listening sessions. We've done that with students and teachers. Mostly they work well for listening sessions because the web pages include transcripts that not only support differentiation for students who want to read while listening, but also have citations of any audio that's used in the episodes. I saw in the chat box somebody really liked the music essay. That podcast transcript is especially exciting. So another poll, I'm curious, that's a lot of resources, and we're going to look in a moment at how other teachers have been using these in the classroom, but what are you excited about? Is it the essays, looking at the lasting impact of slavery on a variety of modern day systems, the creative works, the photography and primary source documents, the podcast? Go ahead and put your answer in the poll here. And one thing that's exciting is we will see momentarily how all of these have been used by teachers across the country. So hopefully give you some ideas. All right, let's go ahead and close our poll in 3, 2, 1, and excellent. Well, I love seeing that there's such a variety here. I can't wait to hear your ideas and to see them in the chat box. Let's take a look at how all 4 of these have been used in the classroom and what you can use to get started. The first thing that you can do is if you go to pulitzercenter.org/1619, You'll see this page titled the 1619 Project Curriculum. What we mean by that are a series of resources that can be used to support your own curriculum. The first thing you'll see are reading guides. And the reading guides include, you'll see an arrow here, to printable PDFs of the full magazine, all the visuals and text, as well as the broadsheet that was printed in the newspaper. Additionally, we've created reading guides for the essays and creative works. On the right, the essays reading guide includes an excerpt from each essay to give you a sense of the reading level and the content. Also, some key vocabulary so you'll know what students might need to know before they read, and some guiding questions that, while students are working at home, they could also be using as comprehension or analysis writing assignments. On the left, we also have some key questions that could be used for comprehension or analysis writing, but what we've done is just create one set of questions for all of the creative works. We have a second, in addition to the reading guides, we've put together a resource of 10 activities that we hope could be used to engage with any part of the project. One essay, one creative work, a mix, the entire project. We tried to write these activities so that we have a mix of engagement with content, personal reflection in response to some of the content, and also opportunities to take action. Any of these activities are written to be easily adaptable for remote learning. So we hope that they can still be useful even as we are navigating this new environment. What we're going to do is dive now into one full lesson plan that we have on the site, and that is in response to Nikole Hannah-Jones's own essay that actually is the first in the project. I'm going to turn the floor over to my colleague Hannah Burke to tell us a little bit about this lesson plan and how it can be adapted for remote learning. Hannah, I turn it over to you.
Thanks, Fareed, and happy to be with all of you. We built a full lesson plan on Nikole Hannah-Jones's essay, which is called The Idea of America, because this essay, as we've already suggested, very much serves as an introduction to the 1619 project and provides an intellectual framework for everything that follows. It's a great place to kick off study of 1619 before diving into additional essays and other resources. The lesson is intended to be adaptable for many different grade levels, as students can read text excerpts or the complete essay and can also engage in discussions with differing level of detail and background knowledge. We've also created printable PDFs of the lesson that are student-facing and printable PDFs of all associated resources that are at the top of this lesson plan when you look at it on our website. So it can be completed as an independent project during school closures. Right now, we're going to explore the components of this lesson together, while also giving us a little bit of a closer glimpse into Hannah-Jones's essay itself. The lesson begins with a warm-up activity that asks students to think about the Declaration of Independence, whose signing is often presented as the foundational date in U.S. history, and consider how its stated values play out in the country today, which sets us up for considering the reframing of history that the 1619 project entails. As students start exploring the idea of America, they'll move into reflecting on how they learned about the history of slavery and its legacy in the U.S., as well as this third question, which is very much a focus of Hannah-Jones's essay as well, which is, what do you know about the contributions of Black Americans to U.S. society? And always interrogating the origins of the knowledge that we have about the United States and its history. The full essay is 10 pages long in the New York Times Magazine, but this lesson asks students to begin by reading a 2-page excerpt in order to process the main ideas before diving deeper and exploring further. We're going to look at a very short passage from the essay now together, and while I read these quotes, I want to ask you to think about the same thing that we would ask students to think about when exploring this 2-page excerpt of the essay together. So the question is, what do you think is the central thesis of the essay, or at least of the passage that you're hearing right now? And you can write your answers in the group chat when you're ready. Before the abolishment of the international slave trade, 400,000 enslaved Africans would be sold into America. Through backbreaking labor, they cleared the land across the Southeast. They taught the colonists to grow rice. They grew and picked cotton that at the height of slavery was the nation's most valuable commodity, accounting for half of all American exports and 66% of the world's supply. They laid the foundations of the White House and Capitol, even placing with their unfree hands the Statue of Freedom atop the Capitol dome. They lugged the heavy wooden tracks of the railroads that crisscrossed the South and that helped take the cotton they picked to the northern textile mills, fueling the Industrial Revolution. They built vast fortunes for white people, North and South. Profits from Black people's stolen labor helped the young nation pay off its war debts and finance some of our most prestigious universities. It was the relentless buying, selling, insuring, and financing of their bodies and the products of their labor that made Wall Street a thriving banking, insurance, and trading sector, and New York City the financial capital of the world. But it would be historically inaccurate to reduce the contributions of Black people to the vast material wealth created by our bondage. Black Americans have also been, and continue to be, foundational to the idea of American freedom. More than any other group in this country's history, we have served generation after generation in an overlooked but vital role. It is we who have been the perfecters of this democracy. And these words, of course, coming from Nikole Hannah-Jones in The Idea of America from the 1619 Project. And I'm seeing some great ideas about what the central thesis of this essay is. So it looks like the kind of thing that a lot of students would be able to glom onto, especially in that longer 2-page essay. So after exploring the short text excerpt, students would be exploring, reflecting, and writing exercises, thinking about what information and ideas are new to them, what might have challenged some of the assumptions that they already held about U.S. history, and how they're responding to that new information, as well as the questions that they have. Some of those questions are very likely to be answered by in-depth exploration of the essay. So as students engage with the remainder of The Idea of America, they can choose between multiple graphic organizers that give different frameworks for following along with the content of the essay. And they can process the details they identify by engaging with analysis questions. The lesson then directs students to our list of 10 extension activities, which Fareed introduced earlier. So this is one example of how an 8th grade social studies class in a middle school in Washington, D.C. processed engagement with the essay by Hannah-Jones. They researched Black American innovators and created posters to showcase inspiring figures from history in the halls of their school to share with all of the students of their school, whether they were studying the 1619 Project or not. This is another way that students at that same school chose to dive deeper after exploration of The Idea of America into the mini essays in the 1619 Project and additional resources. So there are many ways that teachers across the country have been incorporating all of the essays in this magazine, all of the resources, and very creative ideas for how to get students involved with projects and research around these issues. So to take you through a few examples of what that's looked like in different parts of the country, I'm going to hand it back over to Fareed.
Thank you, Hannah. So a few other examples of what we've seen from educators we've partnered with over the past couple of months. On the left here, you see an example from New York City of a teacher who had students create vocab and fact cards based on exploration of the project. On the right, a teacher from, on the left is Baltimore. On the right, we have a teacher from New York City trying the timeline activity. Here we have a school from Philadelphia exploring the erasure poetry activity from the curricula. This is actually inspired by the technique used by one of the the authors of one of the creative works. Here we have students in a DC high school who came up with their own event to engage their student community and local community in the project. On the left, we have students writing in response to quotes from the reading guides. In the center, we have a living museum, and on the right, we have a student performing one of the poems. And then here we had actually a group of professors and community leaders in Houston, Texas, who created a 2-day professional development in partnership with the Pulitzer Center to see how the 1619 Project could support their own local initiatives. On the left, I wanted to point out that they are Skyping with two of the contributors to the Broadsheet, which is something that we can help facilitate for professional development. And what you're going to see on the screen now is the response from a student from New York City.
Where is my family? Lost to inhumane documentation, uprooted from the continent that is now supposedly my own. The one that looks like me, acts like me, but has long been forgotten or never known. Where is my family? Did I lose them when they decided that it was liberty or life? Or was it when they were ripped apart, sibling from sibling, child from parent, husband from wife? Where is my family? Am I just looking in the wrong place? Maybe instead of searching with the slaves, I should look for the white man whose abusive entitlement couldn't resist stealing a taste. Where is my family? They must be here somewhere, because I can feel them coursing through the morals I've been taught, the struggles we still share. Where is my family? I can hear my brothers and sisters claimed by violence, criminalization, segregation, subjugation, poor education, and police brutality. So much frictions, their bodies covered in blisters, agonizing, pleading, tirelessly persevering. Don't act like you don't hear her. Where is my family? Have they died from the symptoms of the system, or have we drifted apart because of trauma, suffering untold, poverty, hypocrisy, a world that wants nothing to do with them? Where is my family? Still, it's your favorite question, leaving a whole generation scratching, clawing, searching, yearning for order, for even a few names to mention. Where is my family? The last time I saw them was in 1619. My family was stolen, conquered, then on absent of liberty. But we fought back against it. Look all that we've achieved. We've parted Red Seas. We used the unmarked graves of our ancestors to plant trees. Imagine my disappointment when all that I can see is the desire for equity being laughed at. Any semblance of progression under attack. Everyday struggles to keep liberty intact. So when you're told to raise your flags, or stand for the pledge, listen carefully to the words that are being said, and remember that the perfection of these ideals for which we have bled has yet to be accomplished. No matter how often they are written or read, remember that democracy has been caught up, but has yet to get ahead.
Crystal was and her fellow students at Bard Early College High School in New York City were responding to this activity from the curricula. At this point, before we move to Q&A, we'd love to do one last poll to get a sense of how you see this project working with your students. Also, recognizing that we're all navigating some new territory with more remote learning. So whether in classroom or working remotely, would reading and discussion be more what you think students would want to do? Writing, art, research? And I do see that in the comments, some people needing a little more time for the poll. So we'll leave this one up for a bit. And then, so maybe I'll just briefly say, I'll go through the next slide so we can, without clicking to it. We are actually collecting lessons and student work from any teachers who want to share so that we can have one centralized location for teachers to learn from each other. So when I click to the next slide after the poll, I'll show you where you can submit those and see some of that work. But we would love to see what you do in your classrooms, and you can do that by emailing education@pulitzercenter.org. So let's see our responses here. And it looks like we've got a real mix. I wish we could all work together on all of these projects. So let's figure out how to do that. We'll be collecting your ideas and would love to share them. And this is our contact information where we can stay in touch. All right, Sheetal, I would love to turn it back to you to get started with the Q&A. Thank you all so much.
Great. Thank you all so much, and a virtual round of applause for our awesome presenters and the content that they shared. I saw there was some great activity going on in the chat box, and we do have several questions. We have about 7 minutes left, so we'll get to as many as we can, and the ones we don't get to, we'll email to the presenters and then share back out the responses. So let me get to the first question. And either one of three of you, or however you guys want to go about it, can respond. Some scholars and historians have criticized various aspects of the project. What is the Pulitzer Center's response to those criticisms?
Hi, this is Mark Schultz. I can field that one. I hope that you all, first of all, have enjoyed the webinar, and I know we don't have much time for questions, and I'm taking up time right now, but I do want to say that please submit them via the Q&A, and we will get to your questions, you know, in the hours, days to come, so don't be shy. But as far as this question, you know, the 1619 Project, it's a series of persuasive essays about the legacy of slavery and the contributions of Black people to American culture. The whole point of it, I mean, it's really meant to spark inquiry and further exploration. It's not a standalone piece. It's not meant to replace this with that, but it's meant to inspire that kind of exploration, inspire artistic interpretations and discussion, some of which you've seen. And I think, you know, we've seen it do that really well last fall semester. We know the project does have some critics, but we really haven't been convinced that there are serious errors of fact in the work. It was quite rigorously checked and vetted. So we actually welcome the controversy and the discussions. We think it's really healthy. We've seen students get really excited about history through the ideas that are introduced in the project. We think it's deliberately provocative, and we think that's a good thing. And so I hope that you've seen in this webinar that our materials are meant to guide students to their own views and to draw their own conclusions as well.
Great, thank you. So we have a few, are there any other responses? Sorry, I just wanted to, before I move on to the next, I'm gonna clump one or two questions together. Are we good to move on, Mark?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, so there's a number of folks on the webinar that teach a younger audience. So, you know, some questions are, I teach first grade, not sure how to integrate into my lessons. Another question is, how do you recommend we engage kindergarten students? And then I have one more that is focused to younger folks. How would you recommend gearing the difficult topic matter to younger grade levels, such as kindergarten through third? So those three questions are around engaging the younger students.
This is Fareed. I can start here. I'm putting in the chat box a link to a guide for the kids page of the New York Times, where the project was synthesized into a list of numbers that are in reference to underrepresented moments in U.S. history as it relates to the lasting impact of slavery. This section called 4 Myths About Slavery, and then also an interview with a historian. And I believe when I looked at it, it felt geared toward in reading, maybe a third and up, but definitely could be processed as a whole group with a younger audience. My other suggestion, first of all, I would love to hear from more of you in the audience who work with this age group, because we would like to see more representation of how elementary students can engage. I would say that the visuals have been really helpful when I've worked with younger audiences. Doing some see, think, wonder, visual thinking, predicting, and then from there starting discussions that are inspired by the project. That's one place, and then also the quotes could be one place to start.
Great, thank you so much. In the last, we have a few more minutes, and I have a question from an educator at an international school. What are some ways that students who may not have a connection to the U.S. and don't have a deep or visceral understanding of the racial tensions and dynamics to better engage them in this material?
I can start trying to answer that question. This is Hannah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a great question. And I think that the essays do provide a great deal of background information. It's possible that you'd need supplementary resources to discuss the history of slavery in the U.S. And there's a reason why the lesson plan on Nikole Hannah-Jones's essay asks students to refer back to primary source documents like the Declaration of Independence. It's important to have a grounding in some of those texts and some of those ideas before diving in more deeply into the persuasive arguments of these essays. So supplementary resources may be important, but the essays do provide a good bit of context for students. And from there, I think that while we haven't begun providing links out to additional content that folks can connect with, there is a great deal of reporting on our website about these kinds of issues, social justice issues, and inequities around the world as well. So we would be very happy if people are interested in reaching out to us at that education@pulitzercenter.org email in discussing more ways in which we can be talking about integrating additional ideas, additional international perspectives, and additional news sources into curriculum on this subject.
And I would also, this is Mark, I would just chime in that if you want, if you're looking for ways to help your students connect kind of empathically and sort of on a gut level with the issue that's really being centrally addressed here, the sort of legacy of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans, you might start with the artistic works. I mean, they're so passionate and they connect really well on an emotional level. Some of those poems are just so profound. I mean, I think everyone was quite moved by the Rita Dove poem. So that might be one way to really ignite some passions as you get the project started.
Great, thank you. And unfortunately, I have to be the person that ends this really fantastic presentation. I want to thank Mark, Fareed, and Hannah for such engaging content, and I'm sure you will hear from all of our, if not many of our participants. And thank you, participants, for joining us. We appreciate your feedback and have 2 easy ways for you to provide it. Please take the survey that's going to show up on your screen in a few seconds. This feedback is valuable to our speakers as well as to AFT Share My Lesson team as we plan for future webinars. And you can visit the registration page for this session on Share My Lesson and add your own rating and review to help others, because this is recorded and will be available on demand as well, so you can share with your colleagues and friends. Before I end, I want to draw your attention to a couple of things. We're constantly adding resources to our distance learning community with helpful tips and free resources. You can participate in an active discussion with other educators and parents, as well as community partners, to get advice on how to navigate this new distance learning world that we're all in right now. You can also upload resources to the community that might be helpful to other educators. Please join us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or wherever you use social media in helping us send our love to our teachers and support staff during these times. Finally, if you're interested in more professional learning opportunities, be on the lookout for information on the AFT Share My Lesson Summer of Learning webinar series this coming July 2020. Thank you again so much, and we hope to see you on another webinar. Have a good evening.